Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Menachot Daf Chaf Dalid. We are going to begin on the bottom of Chaf Gimel Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. So we're going to have a lot of questions with regard to the dinim of Tumah. Kisolk Rav Kahana, when Rav Kahana ascended, Ashkachin Lebei Rabbi Chia, he encountered the Bnei Rabbi Chia. The Yasvi, they were sitting in Kamri, and they were saying the following: Isaroin of flour, which is the requisite amount of flour, Shecholku, it was divided into 2 halves, as we continue Talmud Aleph. Venichoi babiso, it was put into a kli. And Rashi says, Ve'elu shnei chatzoyin eino gein zed zed. They're like on 2 sides of the same kli. But naga tvul yoim be'echad mehen. So you had a tvul yoim who has not yet finished his purification process, and therefore, if he would touch something, he could make it tameh at this stage, and he only touches one of the 2. V'naga tvul yoim be'echad mehen. So ma'u. What's the din, says Rashi, mimatama chaver oloi. So he didn't touch the other one, and they're not touching each other. So the fact that it's in the same kli, maybe that will spread the tumah. Kitanan, when we learned in Masechtas Chagiga, in 3rd parak, kli mitzaref masha b'soichel kodesh. So it said that if you have, again, this similar scenario regarding Kodesh, and a Tvul Yom touches some of it, it will passel the whole thing. It says, I believe because the Pasuk says over there, Kaf Achas, that everything that is in the Kaf, everything that's into a Kli is Achas, like has the same din. So that's only because they're all touching one another. And therefore, the fact that the Tvul Yom touched part of it, it spreads to everything else. However, when it's not touching one another, so in our case, the fact that he touched one, maybe will not matama the other, right? So again, it's only that's in the same kli, but they're not touching one another. So odil moshna. So amalahu. Ihu mitanan kli mechaber kli mitzarf tanan koldehu. It just says it doesn't say kli mechaber, that they're like attached and touching. It's mitzaref, which is mashma koldehu. So what is that mashma? So therefore it's mashma that even though they're not touching, as Rashi says, the enoigin bezem mitzarfin liyos echad. So therefore, it will still be a mitzarf. Okay, so we see that again. That's the din of siruf. There's a din of siruf kli, that when you touch part of the kli, everything in it also has the same status. Fine. We're going to go back to that. Hoyshit echad lebineihem mahu. So says Rashi, chatzi sarin echad lebein hanach chatzi sarin. Let's say there is a in between the asarin, which is that which is needed for the kli, there is something in between. Says Rashi, im naga tvul yoim bezeh mahu shiatama oisin shnayim. So you touched, again, let's say they're not touching one another. So what if you touch the middle one, does it spread to the other ones? So kli mitzdarfai. Anything which needs to be in the kli, like an entire isaroin, so then it will spread out to the whole thing because that's the required amount. But in sarcha kli, in kli mitzdarfai. However, in this situation, this third part, right, is not necessary. As Rashi says, Kagoin hai chatzi isaron, this third piece, the shlishi, den sarcha kli. So therefore, it's the other parts are tahor. So if you touch the part in which is not necessary, and I guess like assuming the question is like, was it put all in the same time or one after the other to be able to establish which was like the third piece, the extra one. So in that situation, we say it's not going to be start, the others are tahor. Let's say not only do we say if he touches one that it spreads to the other one, what if he doesn't even touch it, all he does is put his finger inside, but he doesn't actually touch anything, but it's within the avir of the kli. So the only din that if you would do such a thing that there's a din tuma is only by kli cheres. That's a din dafka by kli cheres, which is mashma in this situation it would not spread. Hadar ihu boy minayu, and then he continued to ask, Mahu likmaitz mizeh el zeh. What's the din of doing kimitza this onto this one? In other words, let's say you did kimitza on one of the halves. Is that kimitza also going to be good for the other half too, even though they're not connected? So, well, we said that there's sirif, so it works. So sirif deraisa or the rabbanon. So the question is sirif deraisa and rabbanon? As Rashi says, Damrin and kaf achas, this Rashi says it. Kasav also chol kaf achas. Everything that's in the kli is a one. Losh no chumra. Doesn't matter if we go strict. Gain tuma. He touches one, the other one comes tame. Losh no kul gain kamitza. Da havi ki'ilu noigin of a kamitza mal yosehi. Therefore, the fact that it's ki'ilu like they were connected, and therefore because they're all like one, so therefore the kamitza works to that other half too. So if you hold that it's a din deraisa, then it's fine. Or maybe it's only din derabanan, and we only go l'chumra but not l'kula. Sarmulo zuloi shamanu. So I don't know an answer to this. However, kiyaitza was shamanu. Something similar to this I did not. It says like this: Shnei menachos. You have these two mincha offerings. Shel nikmatsu. And this was in yesterday's daf, the Mishnah. It says that you didn't do kamitz on them yet. And this arbu zubazu. So they were both at the same stage where kamitza had not yet been performed, and they're all mixed in together. So im yachol likmaitz mizu b'fniatzma b'fniatzmai ksheris. So he said that even though they're mixed together, but if you could be makriv a kamitza for this one and for that one's good, be mapsulos. Now kiyachol likmaitz miksheris. If you have the ability to do the kamitza on for both of them, it works. But why would that say? Why? Amai, can't read this word. Yeah, amai, hachdem arev, that which got mixed up, halo naga, it's not touching. Says Rashi, bekaimitz, if they're not connected, right? V'katanik sheris al mitzirut deraisa. So it's like it's touching, and we see therefore it's a sirif, right? The fact that one, or it says sirif, maybe it's lo deraisa, right? I think maybe that's a different girsa. So anyway, it's a rai over here that we see that this is the din that if that it works. So it sounds like sirif is deraisa, right? As it's the girsa of Rashi. So apparently that's a good raya. So too, if you did a kamitza, therefore even though they're not connected, since sirif deraisa, therefore it works for both. Rabbi Dilma bigushin de mechalukin hasuyin kamisrak. Maybe this is actually not an answer, and we're not talking about a kamitza that each one is separate. We're talking about a case where there are clumps that are together, and it's like the teeth of a comb. What does that mean? Guva mincha machlokin meroish echad mizu k'dei kaimetz mizu k'dei kaimetz avu beroish echad, but each top is touching kemisrak, just like the teeth of a comb. Jemetz zemesh zeh shemetzad echad mechober mitzad echad shine mefuzaros. So, like if you think of a comb, so part of it is disconnected, if you look at the top of a comb, but it's also connected as well. So therefore, maybe it's not a raya. Maybe the reason why it works in that case is because really they're not separate. They're connected at some point, so at some area. So my havala. So anyway, what's the maskana? When it comes to, again, two half pieces which are separated, what's the din if you did kimitz on one? Is there a din siruf or not? So Merava Tashma, the Sanya. The pasuk says Veherim mimenu, and it says that you should remove from it. Now, it's the kimitza. Now min hamachuber, so we say it's from something which is connected. Shul yavi isarin b'shnei kelim v'yikmoitz. You can't have an isarin which is in two separate kelim and do kimitza. They have to be all together. It has to be all together. Mashma habakli. It can't be in two kelim, which is mashma habakli achad. It was in one kli dominishne kelim komets. So that's a raya that even though it's like two kalim because they're just not touching one another, but they're actually in the same kli, so maybe it would work, and therefore that would be a raya that we do say tziruf deraisa. By no dilma shani kalim. Maybe it is different when it comes to kalim. Hechidami kigoin kaviza b'kaba. Says Rashi shechakak mida katana, that you engraved a small amount, but a small kli into another one. In other words, there's a kli in another kli. So maybe it's like one kli, half of it, there's a kli in a kli, so half of it is in one kli, and the other one is in the outer kli. Even though they are mixed from the top of the kli, Kivan de mifsak mechitzasa de kafiza mitata. However, since it is separated from the bottom, so therefore it doesn't connect. That's Rashi. The ein irav hagoydish irav hoyel ve'enu ba'aver hakli v'daikinon hakli echad dumya dehai shu b'shnei kelim kosher. So ha-kli'echa dumin b'beis kelim hechidami. So what's the case of one kli which is like two kelim? I thought it would be like, again, our case of the two pieces not touching. No, hechidami kigain a rivta shel tarnagoyim, like a trough for a tarnagol, says Rashi. A ruba shel tarnagoyim, or a riva shel tarnagoyim, says Rashi. Umachitza nemucha b'emsoyis. They have this like little partition in the middle. K'di lachlik bein mayim more sun, in order to separate, kind of like we see like when it comes to these TV dinners, they're all like separate compartments, but it's on one plate, but there's small indentations. So that's what this trough, that there's some bran there's some food, animal feed, and then there's water in a separate compartment. The oyisa machitza nemucha, it's a very low machitza. It doesn't go all the way up. Ve'ena megas l'svas ha'ariva, doesn't go all the way to the top. Hilkach loves hefseku. In that situation, even though it looks like two kalim, it's doomed to stay kalim, but that's actually kli echad. Right? So in that situation, then you could do a kimitza on such a kli in that situation. Why? So he says, lav hefseku, den nogilamawa min machitza, because they're actually touching from a top. Shnei chatzoyin ba'aver kli, the two halves by the air of the kli. Gabi bisa the chalukin hin legamri lo. But when it comes to the bisa, where they're completely separated from one another, no. Okay. Now v'afagat says the Gemara. So kigayin and rivasa shel tarnagoyim v'afagav the mifsakan mechitzasa. Even though again there's this break of the mechitza, hanagi. They're still touching because the wall, again, the separation is very small. However, here in this case where the two pieces aren't touching at all, it remains as a kasha. Let's look at question 3. So, bomini siruf kli deraisa rabbanon. My nafkumina siruf kli if it's deraisa rabbanon. But my nafkumina yihavi rakmin rabbanon. Okay. So, if it's deraisa, it's not just l'chumra by like the dinim of tuma, but also l'kula. L'kaimitz mishnei chatzoyin b'kli echad. Even if the pieces are not touching, if you did kamitz on one half, it works for the other one. V'yitzaref einu el m'dorbanan moil chumra shehakli mitzaref shnei chatzoyin l'tuma. So if a teful yoim would touch one side, the other side becomes tameh. But that's only maybe because it's midrabanan, we're machmir. So that's the answer. Okay. So we didn't really answer that question. That becomes an boya. However, in the situation again where it's it can't be that it's two separate, totally separate kalim. However, if it's one kli like a trough with a small little break in between, but they really are kind of touching, at least at some point, because the avir, there's still air space in the kli, then that's okay. As opposed to a situation where they're totally separate from one another, so that we're not sure of. So, boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah, sirif kli, with regard to the connection of everything into a kli, the chibur mayim mahu. Says Rashi, Kloimer, chatzi sarin shenitma. So half of the sarin which became tummy, but sirif kli already became tummy. Mahu sheyatama acher bechibur mayim. What if there is a connection through water? Kegoin. You have these two halves that are in a kli. They noigen again, they're not touching, and in that again we said that's in the boy the lishata. But what happened here is v'chatzi saran yesh chutz lekli. There's another chatzi isaran outside v'chibur mayim, and there's water connecting it to this kli. Kegoin nitzuk or tsanur mechaber es shel chutz lekli, just like some type of a pipe or some type of gutter that's connecting the outer one to the kli. Umashu b'toicha kli, that which is in the kli, v'nagatuma b'zeh, a person touched that. Shibakli she'enu noiga b'mayim v'nitma chaver mishum sirv kli. So kitanan kli mitzarev. When do we say that everything inside the kli is mitzarev? Masha b'soicha l'kadosh hanimi legavoy. We only say that's going to be matama when it comes to everything that's inside. That it'll link everything that's inside to one another. But that's maybe only because it's inside. Avadavroi lo. That which is on the outside, maybe not. Oh, dilma kivan the mechaber. The fact that it's connected through water will also be matama. V'imtim soleimer kivan the mechaber. The fact that you have this water connecting it doesn't make any difference. So chibur mayim b'tzir of kli v'nagat tful yom mebachutz mahu. What if the tful yom touched the outside one? Not that it was he would touch the inside one, and the question is, does it spread to the outer one? If it touched the outer one, does it spread to the inner one? Kitan klimat sarav hanimili denagavoi. Maybe it only goes from inside out. Okay. Boy Rava. So now Rava poses another question. He says, Isaron shecholkoi. So you have, again, a Isaron which is split into two parts, as we said before. V'nitma ech mehen. Now one of them actually already became tameh. Okay? And then Rashi says, v'achar kach, he adds that word, and then afterwards, v'anichu babisa. You put both of them into a kli. So again, one was already tameh, one of the chatzi isaron was tameh, and then you put both of them into a kli. Now, and again, they're not touching. So it says Rashi, v'ein noigin, da'ahi vaday lo mahani tziruf. This will not work. Shiaksu zevi yitma zeh. To me, matam the other one. Shahari lo hoye b'kli b'shas tuma. Elin kein chazer tvul yoyim v'naga b'tameh. Mahu shikabel tuma zu kidei lisel chaveroi. So, if all you did was have one which is on the outside, and then you put them both in, so then we don't say siruf. We only say siruf if the tuma takes place while they're inside. If the tuma became tameh before and then was placed on the inside as tameh, it's not going to do siruf for the other one. Now, what is the din though? If let's say it became tameh first, and then again afterwards you put it into the kli, so that itself shouldn't affect the other tahar piece, right? It says Now he touches it. Do we say, Mi amrinan savalotuma? Do we say that the tumah is satiated? Oh, lo. So what exactly does that mean? It says Rashi, Hasaval tuma rishayna v'lo yikabel oy tuma cheres. So if it's like it's enough, it's already satiated, like it's full. You can't. When you're full, you can't eat anymore. So it's the same thing when it's tamei, it can't become tamei again. So therefore, the fact that it was tamei, but it was then put in, it's not going to do siruf. So the fact that you touch it again, you can't make something tamei, right? So maybe it doesn't work. Or do we say no? The reality is, if a tvul yom would be touching this piece, he's going to make it contaminated. So therefore, the fact that he touched it while it was inside doesn't matter if it was tamei already. It will still do siruf. Okay, but tanan. So fine. So that's the question. So sidin, when it comes to a bedspread, it's tamei medras. Okay, and we're gonna end up seeing a bunch of questions over here. So let me just mark this down. It's gonna be question 3. The question says like this. As we turn to Amud Beis, the question is. Let me just read it. Shnei sedinin. So you have these 2 pieces of 2 sheets, right? Like 2 bedspreads. So it says it's tamei medras, right? Now let's say you have these 2 bedspreads, hamukuflim, that they're folded over, umenachim zel zem. They're put right next to each other. Yoshev hazav alehen, and hazav sits upon them. Alehen hatachton tamei medras. Umaga medras. So we say only the bottom was tamei medras, right? So madua tamei maga. Why do we say it's tamei hasabalatuma de medras? Okay, so this is going to be a kasha that if we hold, or a raya, whether we say sabalatuma, and therefore whether or not it would spread by him touching it by this case. So what happens? So if a zav sits on it, it becomes tumas medras. Yosa viloin tahar min ha-medras. But the viloin, this partition, this like window, says Rashi, partial lefnei ha-pesach, you spread it in front of the opening, v'kavu shom, and it's set there, so that is tahar for medras. So the sheet is going to be matama medras. However, the viloin will not, says Rashi, V'lo yitma oid adam, and no one can be matamid she'ein asur medras, because it's not used for lying down. A bread spread could be matama medras because it's used for sitting and lying on. So a zav who lies down on it will be matama medras. However, viloin not. As the Gemara in Shabbos and brings down the Gemara in Chagig over here, it's only mishim yuchad liyeshiva. The only time there's a tumas medras is only something which is fit to be lying down on. If let's say the person is lying down on a viloin, on this curtain, if you will, you would say, "Hey, what are you doing? Get up! Let us use it for its purpose, its utility." So avotame magamedras. So the Gemara says that it's still, even though it's not tamei medras, it's tamei maga medras. What does that mean? At least tamei oichlin umashkim kimisha naga hamedras. So it's not tamei medras, but it's ki'ilu, like something that was tamei medras touched it, and therefore it takes upon itself the din, the lower tuma of maga medras. Now maga medras is matama oichlin umashkim, that if food and drink contacted this viloin becomes tamei. So fine. So Rav Yosi be'ezim medras nagazeh. So what exactly is the reason why this window, this viloin, is tamei maga medras, right? It didn't get touched by anything. Be'ezim medras nagazeh. El she'im nagabo hazav tamei maga hazav. It just means that if a zav touches it, then it becomes tamei through the touching of the zav. So there'll be an element of, again, maga medras. Now, ki nagaba hazav miyatame. So we see that it would become tame. V'afilu b'saif. And that's an important statement. Even b'saif, even at the end. Let's read the parentheses. Ketame medres achach magazav. Just like a person who was tame medres, and then he got touched by the zav. Amai nema savalatumam. So this is actually a raya, right? Says Rashi that ki naga. Let's look at all these Rashis. What is the purpose of this curtain? Sheim naga boy zav koidim shasa viloin. If let's say he touched it before it was a viloin, before it was used for that purpose, v'hoyu olav shtei tumas medris umaga. And it has upon itself tumas medris because it was at that point not used as a curtain, and therefore it could take upon itself tumas medris. Umaga ashav tahar min medris. Now, however, now that it's a viloin, it's tahar from the potential of a medris. Molatami adam ukelim, right? It doesn't have that capacity. However, as we said, neshora of taris magil oichan mashkin. So it doesn't have the stronger level of tuma of being matama adam ukelim, but it can be matama oichan mashkin. Now, even though it's true that in the event where it was not yet a viloin, it would have been potentially matama medris, just like the sedinin. So ki nagabo zav miyatame. So when a zav touches it, becomes tami nami tumas maga. It becomes tami tumas maga. Afilu b'saif la'achar shenitma medris. Right? It means even if let's say this viloin wasn't hooked up yet, and therefore it was, and then a zav touched it, and it was tami tumas medris. We say fine. It's still chala tumas maga. It will also be matama tumas magas medris. L'hayinyana. Shekashiasena viloin, when it becomes a window via tahir min medris, tochel of tumas maga. So it will no longer take upon itself the din of tumas medris, because now the tumas medris, it may have had tumas medris, but now instead of it, it takes upon itself tumas magas medris. The question is, why v'mai nemole savalatum? The fact that you had tumas medris, so that should be it, right? You should say that savalatum, that's the highest level, that's a level of tuma, and therefore this tumas maga medris shouldn't work. So it's a raya that we don't say savalatum. So how do we know we're talking about it's after it was already tami medris and then it becomes tumas maga medris? Dilma mikame medris. Maybe we're talking about first it was matame maga medris and then it became medris. Dahavi tuma chamura al tuma kala. Now it started off with a dilma mikame medris. Dahavi tuma chamura al tuma kala. In other words, it started off with only magas medris, which is only matama oichan mashkin, and then it was the stronger ones. So we can understand that makes sense that if it's a lower level of tuma, it could attain a higher level of tuma, right? So therefore, maybe that's what we're talking about. So the reason why we say it takes upon itself tumas medris and tumas maga medris is only in a situation where it first had tumas maga medris, and then only afterwards the higher level of tumas medris. So maybe that's what happened. In our case, which we were again asking, where it became tummy the outside, and now they're both the same, right? But one's tummy. The question is, they're going to do siruf, so they're the same thing. It's the same level, same form of tuma, right? It says Rashi, Gabi chatzoi Yisrainim. So just because again one was tummy on the outside, who necessarily says maybe there will not be siruf because we say savla tuma. So therefore, there's no raya there. El Maseifa. Why do Rabbi Yosi will agree Mishnei Sedinin, and this is the case that is really going to be question TA3. So this is really the point that he'll agree when it comes to two sheets hamukufloyim, which are folded umenachem zalzeh, and they're one on top of the other, Yosha Zavalein, and the Zav sits on them, Shaha'el Yoin Tami Medris. Obviously, because the Zav is in direct contact with the top one. But Tachton Tami Medris, Umaga Medris. And interestingly enough, he says that the bottom one, of course, would be Tami Maga Medris, but the bottom one is also Tami Medris as well. Yamai Lema Savalatoma. So why don't we say Savalatoma, right? That if it's already Makabel and it's happening like Bavasachas, right? So Hasam Bavasachas Hacha Bezerchazeh. So this is the answer. That when it comes to this case, the Tuma of Maga Maga Medris and Medris of the bottom sheet is happening at the same time. So therefore it's shayach that it can happen both at the same time. However, our case is where one already was tameh, and the question is, it was already tameh, and now it goes in the kli, and the guy touches it again. So in that situation, it's bezer chazeh, so maybe it would not work. Okay, that's going to be the main point. Look at question TA3. Hatachton Tami Medris Umaga Medris, right? Madua Tami Maga, why it should, right? Why Maga Medris? Hasavali Tomas Medris. Once it has Tomas Medris, that should be it, right? That's the higher level, right? So that's the question. And the answer is Bavasachas Ulamrin and Savalatoma. Here it's because it happened at the same time, right? So that's why we don't say that din. They ask the question, Umay nafkamina bezeh shehu tami maga. What's the difference if it's tami maga habalav hachi tami misham medris? This is a great question, because if it's tumas medris is much stronger than tumas maga medris, right? So it's matami even adam v'kalim. So then, frek Rashi, what's the whole difference? So Rashi says nafkamina ba'asu viloin, that once you make into a viloin v'nitaher mehamedris, it no longer is medris. They dain tami mishum maga. So that's the idea behind that. That if before it became right, and now it becomes right, it becomes a veloin, right. So when I'll just write this down. When you make it afterwards into a veloin, so it loses the status of medris, right? Because it's no longer shaykh, because it's not something that you will lie down on anymore. Because you would say, okay, that's the idea behind that. But the main line over here is okay, so that's the main takeaway over here. Let's look at question TB6. It's the same question. Let's see how I did. So I wrote Yesh Hevdel Bein Bezar Zeh V'Hacha B'Vasachas, which is absolutely correct. Going Havilin She'en Matam Medris De'Amrinin Kum V'Nasim Malachtenu. It's exactly the correct answer. Beautiful. Okay, that's correct. That's TB6. Okay. All right. Very good. All right, so let's keep on moving. So Omer Rabba, Isaron Shecholku. Let's say you have an Isaron, which again we divide it into two halves, as we were saying. And then one of the halves gets lost. Okay, so one of them gets lost. And again, you need to have, as we said, just an Isaron. If you have 1.5, then that third piece is not really necessary. Doesn't need the clean. It's not going to be. There's no din siruf. Now, what happens that one of them is lost? The hifresh achar tachtov, and you put another one in its stead, and then v'nimsa harisha, and then you found the first one. So the original one was part of to complete the required measurement of the saron, a flour. But since you lost half of it, now you brought another half. Now you have 1.5. For shloshta munachim babisa, and all three of them are now in the same kli. Okay, so this looks like question 4. Okay, so what's the din of ahari shosha menachem mabisa? Nitma avoid. Let's say the one that was lost, which was really part of the original two halves, if that became tummy, avoid varishan mitzdarfen. The lost one and the other first half becomes mitzdarf because they were connected originally. Mufresh ain mitzdarf, but the mufresh, the one that you separated later, is not mitzdarf because at that point it's really like a newcomer, right? So therefore it's beyond the requirement. So that's the reason for that. Look at Rashi. Albad Varisha Mitzdarfen, Benitma Harisha Machma Zeh B'tzir Kli. Mufresh Shehifresh Tachas Zeh, but the third piece, if you will, right? The newer piece, if you will, the replacement, right? The replacement part, which was Tachas Zeh, Eino Mitzdaref, Lissel Imoy. Shahari Lo Hufresh Almanas Litzdaref. Avudim. That isn't correct. 1 second. Shahari lo hufresh almanas litzdaref im ha'avud, together with the lost one. That says vasharish limchayk. Okay, I'm just going to put that in parentheses. That threw me off because they're not both lost, right? So it is. So anyway, the point is that other piece is not mitzdarf. Nitma mufresh, let's say the third piece, this replacement piece, is the one that became tamei. So mufresh, obviously that one is tamei. There's no question. Berisha mitzdarfen. However, oven in mitzdarf. So basically, if the oven gets lost, it's not going to be matama the mitzdarf. And the mitzdarf, if the oven gets lost, the third piece, which is called the mufresh, is not included. If the mufresh becomes tamei, then it's not going to be matama the avud, right? So it works both ways. Now here's the kicker. Nitma rishain. Now the rishain has a link really to both of them, to the one that was lost, because that was originally the isaron, and the mufresh, which connected it to the new isaron, if you will. So nitma rishon shnei mitzdarfen. So basically they're all going to be tamei according to him. No, doesn't make any difference. Not just the rishon, but in all situations, if any of them become tummy, they're all going to be mitzdarf. My time akuhu b'nei bikta dahadadininu. They're all considered to be from the same home. They're all partners and connected to each other, and therefore, because of that, the din is that they're all tummy. So either they're all tummy, or it depends on which piece we're talking about. Okay. So v'chein l'inyan kemitza. All right. So let's go slow. Let's go at question. It says question 4 aleph. Nitma harishon. If the first one became tamei, min nitma imoy. So definitely the rishon. So the rishon. That's it. Everyone holds. I think everyone holds. It's matam the whole thing. Right? Nitma rishon shneim nitma imoy. Right. So that's l'divrei hakoil. Okay. That's that. That's 4a, and that's l'kuli alma. Everyone holds like that. Okay. Fine. So v'chein l'inin kemitza. So the same din is when it comes to kemitza. What is that? Kamutz mina avod. So again, when it comes to doing the kemitza, and you did kemitza from the part that was lost, so shira v'rishain nechal. So its leftovers and the first one can be eaten because it's all linked. It's linked to the original one, right? Because the avod, if you did the kemitza from that part, so therefore we go back to the original Yissaron, and therefore it's considered to be shirayim. However, mufresh eno nechal. The mufresh cannot be eaten because it's not part of the isaron. It was like an add-on, like almost as a substitute if we don't find the other one. But I found the other one, so now this one doesn't count. Kamatz min mufresh. If let's say I did kamitza from that new part, so shira varisha nechol, because like it's now linked to the new isaron, if you will, and oven eno nechol. So it's the same idea. However, kamatz min arisha, if you did kamitza from the other half, if you will, so shteim eno nechol, then interestingly enough, then both of them cannot be eaten. Now, why not? Right? So why not? So says Rashi, Shari Shnehem Niskokin L'Koimtzai Shel Rishon, because both of them have a link to the original one, but now all of a sudden you have more than is necessary. The Kaimitz Einu Matir El Isaron. It can only be Matir and Isaron. Oisu Chatzi Shehufresh Mimenu, the other half, the Echem and Hachatzoyin, Halolu, either one. Right? Kivan de lo yada ezu. We don't know which one. We don't know. Let's say which one's which one should connect to. Lo nechol lo zev lo zeh. In other words, the matir only is matir the shiraim of up to an isaron. But since now you have more than isaron, so you can't eat from either of them. He says you can never eat from any of them. My time cool now the hadadin, who, as we said, the same thing. It's all like in the same home. It's all designated and part of the same mincha, and therefore they're all partners and connected to another. So this is kamatz min arishain mi nitir imo. This is also kuliyalma, right? You can't eat any, right? Kamatz min arishain in a nitarin imoy, and that's also ladivri ha kol. Okay, kamatz min arishain. And again, that's lekule. That's lekule alma. Everyone holds like that. Okay. So maskevura papa v'shirayim didei mi'nacholan. Understand? It shirayim you should be able to eat. Ha'ika, we're saying you could eat, right? You could eat from the shirayim of the thing itself, of the rishon. The question is the other two halves you can't. But this, of the kamitza of this half, you can do, because it's definitely shiraim of that. But the question is, ha'ika danka de kaimitz, there is a danka, there are, since there's three halves, so there's actually 1/6, right? Because if each one is a third, so therefore half of it is a sixth, the lokarev. Says Rashi, da tilta, the high kumtza enu chashuv machmas chatzi saron hashlishihu shar shloshim huskul kaimitz zeh hilkach havi high kaimitz chaser tilta demati danko cholchad mishni chatzui yisaroni machshirin as a mincha. So therefore, according to them, he says you shouldn't be able to be makrav at all. You shouldn't be able to eat even that. Maskiv Rav Yitzchak beredu Rav Misharshi v'kaimitz gufa hechi karev. So one second, so forget about eating the shirayim of it, but how could you do the kamitza? Ha'ika talata chulin. One of them is definitely chulin. So how can you do kamitza at all on this one? So Rav Ashi Omer kaimitz, because when the kohen does kamitza, midaita the kohen talia milsa. It's all totally on the das of the kohen. The kohen ki kamatz isarin kamatz. So his das is that the kamitza is on an isarin. So he doesn't need to necessarily know which one is the isaron, but he knows it's only an isaron and not more. So therefore, he's able to do the kamitza. However, the question is, does that answer up also about eating it? So Rashi says, "Hanach tarti pirchi la pircha." Actually, it's not. Both of them is not a question. Kivan deloy kamatz elomin ha'echad kamitzas hamincha b'daita de kayin talia. It's all totally on the kayin. The kayin ki kamatz adaita di saron chadhu de kamatz hilkach. Kayin, it's only on one. Therefore, kaimitz karev shirai rishon necholin. He actually says you could eat from that rishon, as we said before. The shnaim in the necholin. The other two halves you can't. There's no way he can possibly know which one it is, but by his das. but nonetheless, his das certainly is only on the saron, and therefore that's why he could do kimitza, and that's why you can also eat the shiraim of the rishain, but not from the others. Okay, so that's going to be the basic answer regarding that. Adkan.